Hi, Peter Salemian. Welcome to part 8 of this video series on the Passover. Should Christians keep the Passover? And also defending the position that Jesus Christ of Nazareth resurrected on a Sabbath afternoon and not a Sunday morning. Now, if you've watched our videos on this topic, we prove to you from the Bible that Jesus Christ, when he was crucified that week, that there were 2 Sabbaths that week. The annual Sabbath of the first day of unleavened bread that happened at sunset after the crucifixion. Then 3 days and 3 nights later, the weekly Sabbath happened. And on that weekly Sabbath, late on that weekly Sabbath, Jesus Christ of Nazareth resurrected around 4 p.m. And then, as the Gospels record, at the end of the Sabbath, that's Saturday at sunset, at the end of the Sabbath, the women came to the tomb, and the angel told them that Jesus isn't here, he's already risen. So Jesus rose on that Sabbath afternoon. Now, there's an argument out there from the Bible.ca, and they claim that there were no 2 Sabbaths that week, and this is their argument. It says here, nowhere in the Bible is the annual Jewish feast days like Passover, days of unleavened bread, called high Sabbaths or high days. So the Bible itself, by its silence, refutes this concept completely. So they're saying there's just one Sabbath that week. The weekly Sabbath, Jesus Christ crucified on a Good Friday, resurrected on a Sunday morning. Now, they also say this. When the Jews use the word Sabbath, it always refers to the weekly Sabbath. Is that true? Is this claim, is this argument valid? I mean, this website has poor scholarship, and all it does is just defend their traditions, not the doctrines of the Bible, their man-made tradition. That's pretty much all this website does. So is this argument valid? Nowhere in the Bible are the Jewish feasts called high Sabbaths, and that the Jews only use the word Sabbath for the weekly Sabbath? Is that true? Well, let's go through Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. To start, Leviticus 23, verse 2, notice what God says here. He says, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feasts of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feasts." So they're called feasts, and they're called holy convocations. And what does God start off with? The weekly Sabbath. Verse 3, 6 days. You shall work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest. On holy convocation, you shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. So here we see that the Sabbath is called a feast, a holy convocation, and no work is to be done. Notice verse 4. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations. So here, now God's talking about the annual festivals, and he calls them holy convocations, just like he called the Sabbath a holy convocation, the weekly Sabbath. Notice, the first day, you shall have a holy convocation. And it says, you shall do no servile work therein. Why? Well, because it's a Sabbath of rest, as it says here in verse 3. A Sabbath of rest, holy convocation, you shall do no work therein. The same language is applied here for the first day of unleavened bread. The 7th day, verse 8, is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. Why? Because it's a Sabbath of rest. Notice verse 24, talking about the Feast of Trumpets. It says here, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath." Here we have an annual Sabbath. A feast day is called a Sabbath. Memorial of blowing of trumpets. Unholy convocation. Same language for the weekly Sabbath. You shall do no servile work therein. I mean, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure this out. That the first and last days of unleavened bread, the first day of the Feast of Trumpets, they are called Sabbaths, and no work is to be done. The Day of Atonement, verse 27, talks about the Day of Atonement. It shall be an holy convocation unto you. Verse 28, you shall do no servile work therein. Your soul shall be afflicted, verse 29. And then in verse 32, it says, it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls. The Day of Atonement is called a Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation, an annual Sabbath. For Feast of Tabernacles, verse 35, it says, there shall be an holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. And then it says, the 8th day shall be a holy convocation. Verse 36, it shall be a solemn assembly. You shall do no servile work therein. Then verse 39, it says, 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath. Talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. So plainly, the feast days, the first and last days of these feast days are called Sabbaths. So as you can see here, the Bible.ca is wrong. And it says when Jews use the word Sabbath, it always refers to the weekly Sabbath. As you can see, it's wrong, according to the Bible. Now, we get to the New Testament. Now, in the Gospel of John, John 19:31, it says this, the Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean the preparation for the weekly Sabbath? Absolutely not. John says in verse 14, he specifically says that it was the preparation of the Passover. He's making these clear distinctions to show people exactly what happened on which days of that particular week. So there's no confusion. When he's speaking of the preparation day, he's talking about the preparation of the Passover. And then here it says in verse 31, there was a preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was an high day. He makes that clear distinction, so there's no confusion. When he says the high day, he's not talking about the weekly Sabbath. He's talking about the great Sabbath, the high day Sabbath, and they are called Sabbaths, as we've seen in Leviticus 23rd chapter. It was a high day Sabbath, talking about the first day of unleavened bread, which is called the night to be much observed in Exodus, the 12th chapter, verse 42. Now, in another place in the Bible, here we see, in John 7:37, here talking about another feast day. And it says this, in the last day, that great day of the feast. So here we see the last day, and it's talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. On the last day, it is called the great day of the feast, and it's the same word used for the high day Sabbath in John 19:31. And here in John 19:31, it's talking about the first day of unleavened bread, and here it's talking about the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which God says are called, in Leviticus 23rd chapter, I just read to you, they are called Sabbaths. The last great day of the feast is called a Sabbath, and it's called a great day. And it's the same Greek word here in John 19:31. So these Sabbaths of the first and last day of unleavened bread, Feast of Tabernacles, they are called great days. And even the ancients knew it. Like here's one example, Claudius Apollinaris, Bishop of Hierapolis. He called this day in John 19:31 the great day of unleavened bread. And that's in Scaff, History of the Christian Church, Volume 2, page 203. So there's no mistaking it. In the Old and New Testaments, the great days of the first and last day of unleavened bread, Feast of Tabernacles, they are called great days, great Sabbaths. They are called Sabbaths. They are annual Sabbaths. And with this understanding, we can again understand Mark 16:1 and Luke 23:56. I already did a video on this topic, but when we understand that there were two sacred days of rest that week, we can understand Mark 16:1 and Luke 23:56, where the women we're seen buying spices after the Sabbath, meaning the high day Sabbath, and then Luke records them preparing the spices and then resting on the weekly Sabbath. So there is no contradiction. Now notice here in Matthew 28, it proves plainly, when you look at the original Greek, that there were 2 Sabbaths that week. Matthew 28:1. It should read this way, and this is from the NIV, Interlinear Greek-English New Testament by Marshall, page 134. It says, "But late of the Sabbaths, at the dawning towards the close of one of the Sabbaths." So plainly there were 2 Sabbaths that week. And the Farrar Fenton translates it the same way. It says, "After the Sabbaths, toward the dawn of the day following the Sabbaths," plural. And then Farrar Fenton says this on page 1042 of his Bible. It says this, "This is literally according to the Greek text. And it's important to observe that at that particular period, there were 2 Sabbaths or days of sacred rest." There were 2 Sabbaths that week. So when Jesus died and and it dawned towards sunset, the Sabbath began, meaning the high day Sabbath, and then 3 days and 3 nights later, on the weekly Sabbath, that late Sabbath afternoon, Saturday afternoon, around 4 p.m., Jesus Christ of Nazareth resurrected. And then at the end of the Sabbath, that sunset, the women came to the tomb, and the angel said that Jesus was gone already. Now, if you want to know more, you want to study this in great detail, I wrote this article on the high day Sabbath. I'll put the link in the description below, and you can read this article that I wrote on the high day Sabbath, that there were 2 Sabbaths that week. I'll also put the booklet, Passover, Is It for Christians? And our other booklet, Jesus' Resurrection on the 7th day Sabbath. And we prove to you out of the Bible that Jesus Christ of Nazareth resurrected on a Sabbath afternoon and not a Sunday morning. This is Peter Salemi saying goodbye, friends. I'll see you here next time on the Watchman program.